Hi, and welcome to this short webinar designed to introduce some of the key features of version 15. My name is Dan Christmas, and I'm Head of Customer Training for Sabio, and I'm joined here today by a couple of my colleagues, including Selena, who's here to help ensure this webinar runs smoothly and also to collate any questions that you may want to ask, and I'll address those at the end of the session. So thank you all for joining me. Before we get started, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. On your screen towards the left-hand side of the screen, there'll be a little toolbar that you should be able to see. If during the session you'd like to ask any questions, could I ask you to use the question button on the toolbar? So if I could ask you just to hit that for me now and just try and send me a little test question. You can expand the toolbar by hitting on the orange arrow at the top of the screen, and you should see the question box there. Just type in something like hello or something like that and send it across just to let me know that you can use the question tool. Okay. Wonderful. I can see those coming across now. Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. And also you'll see on the toolbar a little icon which is a raise hand icon. If you get stuck or have any technical issues while we're going through the webinar, or for example you can't hear me or your screen isn't changing, use the raise hand icon just to let me know that you're having difficulties, and then we can assist you if we can. Okay, so if everyone's ready, let's get started. So this session today, coaching and performance management. I'd like to start by looking at a definition of performance management. This definition has been taken from the CIPD website. It's a 2006 definition of performance management, and it says that performance management is an ongoing process of communication between a supervisor and an employee that occurs throughout the year in support of accomplishing the strategic objectives of the organization. As a communication process includes clarifying the expectations, setting objectives, identifying goals, and providing feedback and reviewing results. This is one of many definitions that you'll find of performance management, but there are some key parts of this definition which I'm going to extract and kind of go down into a little bit more detail in as we go through this session. Now, what would really help me to try and understand a little bit about your organizations and what you're doing with performance management today is what I'd like to do is to ask you a quick poll. Now, what I'm interested in is how often you perform performance management with your employees today. So as part of your day-to-day business that you're doing, I have a question for you, which is how often do you performance manage your staff or your employees? So if you could pick an option for me, click on submit, and when I see those coming back through, we'll then carry on with the session. Okay, that's wonderful. That's everyone voted for me, so thank you. So it's interesting that I've got 40% of you are saying that you you are doing performance management on a daily basis or more frequent basis, so 40% continuously, sorry, 20% daily, and then I've got the remaining of you saying monthly or weekly, and one saying quarterly or annually. One of the things that comes out of the definition of performance management is performance management is defined as an ongoing process, a process which for many people will often resemble a cycle. On screen here is a very traditional view of a performance management program. It's a cyclic process that goes through a number of measurable stages. Now, this may be different from your organization, it may change, but hopefully as we go through this, you'll recognize some of the key stages that form the performance management process. Now, most organizations will perform these activities, selection, evaluation, and reviewing, using processes such as quality monitoring. It's a traditional way of monitoring or evaluating your employee performance, normally in relation to an interaction or call, and it can take the form of a formal review process where you're sitting down side by side with an employee, or it may be a remote process where you're performing quality monitoring as an offline stage or remote from the employee. As you move through the cycle, once we've completed the review stage, we move normally into the more traditional coaching activities. And in the coaching activities, we are taking our observations and providing feedback and structured guidance to try and either provide some way of improving or helping with the situations that we're observing. Now, within the coaching area, we move through the stages of completing the review, but more detailed analysis is performed of the data that we've observed. And the most important part is we need to act on that data then to actually to drive some form of change. Together, these two sides, the coaching side and the quality monitoring side, this cyclic process, collectively, this comes under the banner of the performance management model that we're talking about. But performance management within the concept of version 15, it's not just one tool or another or a process that you're going to go through. Performance management will mean many different things to each of you and to each company that uses or goes through performance management. Within version 15, the application has been specifically designed to give you access to a whole range of tools to help you with the performance management process. Now, for those of you who have joined me in some of the earlier webinars that we've run in this series, you should recognize this as a version 15 home screen. This is the main screen that an employee sees when they log into the version 15 application for the first time. Now, within the version 15 application, it's been redesigned to bring all of the performance management tools together into one handy area. So down the side here, you'll see performance management. And within this area here, we will see we've got scorecards, which is where we're going to start in a moment, and the Explore Performance module. We have performance plans, which are to do specifically with goal setting and the management of performance, and then the coaching tool that we have sitting over here. What I'm going to do now is to explore some of these tools in a bit more detail with you and take you through how performance management can work within the version 15 application. And I'm going to start by exploring scorecards. So this screen will just take a few seconds to load up as it launches into the scorecard application. Now, within the version 15 tool itself, Scorecards has been completely redesigned, so it's redesigned with a new, much more visual look and feel to it. And the screen that we're now looking at is the scorecard of an individual performer, Herschel, in this example here. Now, the screen itself is divided into a number of key areas. Now, the first thing that should jump out at you when you're looking at this screen is you should see color, lots of color. The Scorecards module is all about providing visual insight, the ability to very quickly identify areas where you might need to focus your attention. Now, the scorecard that we're looking at here displays Herschel's performance against a range of KPIs, key performance indicators. Many of you may be existing scorecard users, and you'll appreciate that scorecards can come, or KPIs can come from all across your business and from your enterprise. Within the application, we can have KPIs that come from internal systems like quality monitoring, so we can report on feedback in response to questions or categories that we're measuring within the evaluation process. But they can also come from external systems such as the phone systems, core behavior, and even things like speech analytics. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. Now, in this example here, you should be able to see quite quickly green and red on the scorecard. And it shouldn't be difficult to work out that green is probably good, red is probably bad. Now, the other thing that we'll see on the screen on here as well is you should see that there's a new area within the application called the Improvement Opportunities widget. The term widget refers to a component or module that sits within this dashboard. And this area in the middle of the screen here is called the Improvement Opportunities widget. The improvements opportunity element of the screen shows the KPIs within the time period that you're looking at. In this example, I'm looking at a week. So these are the KPIs within this week which have had the greatest change. So it shows you in order of change. So at the top of the list, we've got the customer retentions KPI, and as we move down through the list, the KPIs at the bottom of the list have the lowest change in that period of time. So this can give you a really good way of highlighting areas where you might need to start focusing your attention. Now, we can view that by score or by trend, so we can look at the biggest change relative to score or the biggest change relative to the trend. What I'd also like to do is to now move across to focus more on the individual KPIs. And what I'd like to do is to now drill down to look at one of these KPIs. And the one that I'm actually going to pick on is hold contacts. Now, looking at the hold contact lozenge that we can see here, we can see that there is a score of 38% on the score here. And we can also see quite quickly there's a goal value of 15%. So clearly Herschel's score is above the goal. Now, I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about the indicators here in a bit more detail later on, but what I'm going to do now is drill down into the individual KPI and start to explore a little bit about what I'm seeing on screen here. Now, the first thing that should be jumping out from the screen here is a line in the middle of the screen that as I move my mouse across the screen, I can see the points that have been measured, the data points that I've received for this KPI, and I can see Herschel's performance over time as I move across the graph. Again, this is looking at a weekly view within the window here. Now, as well as the values that I can see in here, at the top of the screen, again, we've got that goal information. I can see within the peer group the position that Herschel sits in, so position 93. Now, the peer can be set up to be either a percentile, a rank, a grade. So you can choose when you configure the KPI what the peer value would represent. In this example, it's the position within the peer group. So currently, Herschel's position 93. I also have an indicator here that within the organization, only 2.27% of employees currently have met this goal. So it's obviously proving quite challenging for people. Now, the indicator here, if the red doesn't tell you that this is bad, well, we have the word bad here, which tells me that this isn't something which I'm looking for. Now, down towards the bottom of the screen, let's start to explore now a little bit more about what we can do. Now, this KPI hold contacts is actually not just reporting on where Herschel has pressed the hold key. In this example here, this KPI has actually been built by using speech analytics categories to look at the use of hold language. So what it's actually reporting on is the calls where Herschel has expressed hold language, such as, do you mind if I put you on hold? Or I'm just going to put you on hold for a moment. So it's analyzing the actual calls for the kind of context and the use of hold around those. Now, looking at this data on here, as well as the actual values, I can now start to actually add extra things in here. So I can add on the goal line. So very quickly, I can now see both points, the goal in relation to the value. I can show the scores, so I can chart the individual scores that have been obtained. And I can also layer on the trend. So within this example here, I can now see the goal and Herschel's individual scores, and this represents an upwards trend, which means we're getting further away from the goal over the time period. So this isn't particularly good. Now that we understand that there might be a problem with Herschel's hold language, let's think about what we might want to do to try and address that performance. And version 15 makes things very easy to start to move from one tool to another. So from visualizing that we might have a problem, I'm now going to go straight into trying to address that by using coaching. This little icon here allows me to create a coaching session. When I click onto the coaching icon, I'm taken to something called the KPI selector, and you'll see that it's already been pre-populated with the KPI hold contacts, because that's where I was when I clicked on the button. When I click on next, I'm taking into a manage coaching session screen. This is where we're going to create the request for the coaching session. Now, this will create a request that will go forward into the scheduling platform and be scheduled by your workforce management team, and I'll talk a little bit about that again in a latter part of this session. But what we can see here is at the top of the screen, we have the ability, if we want to be able to select a topic. A topic is a predefined template for a coaching session. So, for example, if I had lots of problems with hold time, I might have a template which includes a lesson, some guidance, maybe some instructions or worksheets for the employee to follow through. And by clicking the template, they can immediately be selected and loaded as a model. So shortcut that process of setting up the coaching session. A box for me to enter the reason. I can identify who would like to deliver the coaching. I can identify the date that I'd ideally like it to take place, and also any follow-up dates if required. And then down here, an area where I can complete the scheduling information to go forward to WFM. And again, we'll look at that a little bit later on. Now, below there, this coaching session has got the KPI connected to it. The coaching session provides a permanent record for the employee to go back to when they're reviewing their performance and development plans over time. What this means is, in 6 months' time, if Herschel starts to have difficulties again with hold or any other aspect of their call handling, they can go back to their previous coaching sessions and they can review the information. By clicking on that coaching button, I've automatically attached the KPI that led to this coaching session to the coaching form as a piece of evidence that we can discuss in the coaching session, but it's also there to review and to look back on if you need to. Now, this coaching form, once submitted, will go through to the planning team and will become a working document that will be used to drive that coaching session. Once we have the coaching session, we'll fill in a meeting summary, And as it moves through the progress, the employee will also provide an end to their feedback, which will be captured in this box down here and stored as a working record. So now that we understand a little bit about the coaching session, we could actually start to think a little bit more about how the tools can be used together. In that process, I manually created the coaching request by clicking on the coaching button. In version 15, we also have the ability to automatically assign coaching if required. Within the system itself, we have a set of tools called alert rules. These alert rules are actually located in the tracking component of version 15. This is where we configure all of our alarms, automation, and notification type activities. Now, the part of functionality that we're interested in is called a notification, and it's an organizational rule. There are 3 types of rules that you can configure in version 15. Rules that relate to organizational characteristics, rules that relate to scheduling or workforce management characteristics called campaign rules, or system rules, which are overall system health. If I go into organizational rules, we will see an example of an organizational rule. And in this example, I can show you how this could drive automatic coaching assignments. So what we have at the top of here is the trigger. The rule is a KPI out of range rule. And what I'm saying here is whenever the web upsell KPI daily value is equal to or greater than whatever value I specify, so I'm defining the trigger, the point at which the rule will fire, what I would like you to do is to perform one of the following actions. Now, those actions are quite simple. They could be just send me an email saying Jenny has missed the KPI or Mark has met the KPI, to send me an email and let me know. So I might let the employee know, I might let their supervisor know. And again, I can choose who I want to notify, and I can construct the message as I want to. But after I send the message, I now have a set of other actions that can be performed when the alert fires. So for example, I could create a coaching session. By ticking this box, anytime this rule fires, it will create an ad hoc coaching session using the template customer retention. It will schedule it in workforce management. It will create a 30-minute window for that coaching session. And if this alert might fire multiple times within the same time period, to make sure that I don't get multiple coaching requests, I can ensure that I limit it to a maximum of once a day or maybe once a week, so only one request is created per week if that's what's appropriate. You'll notice towards the lower part of the screen there's also options to automatically assign lessons or competencies that might be required. In this way, using alert rules, not only do we have the option of having manual coaching, but we also have the ability to be able to do automatic coaching assignments. So the system can proactively police things that might be going wrong and start to highlight those by scheduling coaching sessions or passing coaching sessions through to your scheduling team. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the coaching sessions, both manually creating them and automatically creating them. I'm going to go back to scorecards now, and we're going to now start to have a little bit of a closer look at some of the details that we'll see within the scorecard view. Now, when we go back into the application, we're going to go and have a look at the Herschel user again. And in this example, what I'm going to do now is to start to drill down and have a little bit more detail at how we can start to get an idea about who our best performers and worst performers are. So in this screen here, we were looking at the view of Herschel's hold contacts. Now, there's a couple of things that we're going to do in here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to, first of all, show you how we might start to swap from looking at Herschel to very quickly starting to have a look at the peers. By clicking on this second icon here, what I'm now looking at is, rather than reviewing Herschel's view, what I'm now looking at are Herschel's peers. Now, in this example here, at the top of the screen, we have a radio button which enables us to actually change from looking at the highest performers, so the leaders, or going to the bottom of the screen and looking at the people who are struggling, the people who really need to have our help. So this is looking at the population that Herschel sits in, his peer group, and allows you to very quickly see how the others are performing within the organization. So get a view as to top performers or worst performers. As well as looking at the leaderboard in that way, one of the other things that we can do is when we are analyzing a single KPI, it can be quite easy to see what's going on by looking at these lines and by looking at who's at the top of the list. But let's consider maybe that we're looking at a group of performers. So in this example, I'm going to select a wide group of performers here. So lots of different users are being selected. And when I select lots of different users, what I'm then going to do is start to look at a lot of different users across a range of KPIs. So rather than looking at a single KPI, I'm going to look at a range of users across a range of KPIs. Now, when we do this, when we consider a range of users across a range of KPIs, what the system does is present you with a heat map view. Now, although there's not a lot of data here for us to look at, and that's what the grey blocks tell us, what you can see is that the individual lozenges that you see very quickly highlight areas where you need to focus your attention. So when we are considering our view, when we start to think about how we can quickly identify our leaders, and in this concept our laggards, the people who are struggling, we've got two really powerful tools at our fingertips. We've got the instant peer review, which we could access by clicking on the peer icon to allow us to quickly see how the peer group are performing. So as a team leader, I could be focusing on Mark, but I can very quickly see how the rest of my team are performing by looking at the peer review. And if I'm not sure of exactly where my problem areas might be, by taking this heat map view, I can very quickly zoom in on the red spots, which are the areas where people are struggling, which have the biggest areas where I need to do some work. So we've talked about the heat map. We've talked a little bit more about how that might work. What I'm going to do now is focus down on another user down here called Sherry. Now, Sherry, as a user, is having a few challenges with a few of her KPIs. Now, the KPI that I particularly want to look at is the escalations contacts KPI. Now, I mentioned earlier there's a lot of information in this lozenge, and I want to focus on some of those bits now. What we can see here is that the goal for escalation contacts is 5%. Sherry's score is 40%, so she's well above target. Now, I can also see by the little infographic that the trend is in an upwards fashion, so it's going upwards. And hopefully you can notice there's a little black arrow pointing upwards as well. The direction of the arrow tells me the direction of the trend. The color of the arrow tells me whether it's a good or positive trend or a bad or negative trend. So a black upwards pointing arrow is an upwards trend, which is bad, so it's not desirable. So we want a lower score. So I can clearly see by looking at this that Sherry has a problem. Now, when we start to look at the escalation contacts for Sherry, and I go into the same view that we saw earlier, I can see quite quickly that things aren't particularly good. The goal is down here at 5%, and Sherry's performance is clearly deviating from that. So how can we bring Sherry back in line? How can we address her performance? Well, one of the methods that you should be familiar with or may have heard before is something called SMART. So within version 15, there's the ability to get SMART using something called performance plans. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. SMART is a methodology used in goal setting. It's unrealistic to say that Sherry is going to get her goal back down to 5% next week, next month. If you went to an agent or an employee and said, you need to reduce your escalations from 40% to 5% and you need to do it now, setting an unrealistic goal will actually have a negative effect on performance. So if you don't get the goals right, not only do you not encourage performance improvement, but actually you can have a really demoralizing effect on people, and that can have a negative and unattended effect on what you're trying to do. Within version 15, this SMART methodology has been used to build something called performance plans. And at the top of the scorecard here, you'll see there's a new icon called performance plans. And what this will enable me to do is, just like the coaching plan that starts with the KPI selector, and again in this example, escalation contacts is selected, what I can now do is define a fix-it plan for Sherry. Using the concept of SMART, her goal is to get down to, in this example I'm saying 6%. I would like her to get to that goal, but to do it in meaningful steps. So what I can do is, using a performance plan, is I can say, by this date, you need to achieve 30, by this date, 25, by this date, 15, and you can produce as many steps or as layers as you need in your plan to actually give small, meaningful steps to actually encourage the performance improvements in the right direction that you want them to be. So performance plans provide a smart and manageable way of structuring goals in order to bring an employee back into the fold and make them, or get their performance back on track again. So that's performance plans. That's again can be a really good way of starting to move people back into the fold and starting to work really quite intelligently with the tool. Now, before we move away from scorecards completely, we're going to complete this lesson by starting to think a little bit more about how we can start to join these up together within the system. So I'm now back into the Herschel view, and I'm going to go back onto hold contacts. Now, one of the things that we can do from here is, when we start to think about Herschel, if you can remember that performance management cycle, one of the things we want to understand, if you want to go through this process of analysis, why is Herschel holding calls? What's going wrong? Why are the call holds going up? Part of our analysis might mean that we need to understand or listen to the contacts or calls that Herschel is involved in. And if you remember, this KPI is using speech data to identify use of hold language. Well, let's start to have a look at that scenario. By clicking on this button, because version 15 is one integrated system, I can immediately drill down to the underlying interactions or underlying recordings that Herschel has dealt with during this period. So in this window here, what I can see here are Herschel's calls. And for those of you who attended my earlier webinar on the Unified Player, you should recognize this as the interactions replay window. So here are Herschel's calls. I'm going to immediately expand the minimal player to the analytics view. And when this opens, we can see quite quickly that this call has got a couple of speech categories that have been pulled out, but you can see here where we've got put you on hold being mentioned here. So we can see where the hold language has come into play and where it's being used. Now, when we were going through our evaluation process with this, what we would do is, from the full workspace, which is just opening on here, we would conduct an evaluation of the call, listening to the call and completing an evaluation form as we go through that process. So what we are now going to start looking at is, well, from this process, once you start to listen to the calls, what we can start to do now is we can start to also leverage and use that coaching functionality. And there's a couple of really important things that I want to highlight for you on here. Now, the first thing is that from this screen here, where we are reviewing and evaluating the call, if you remember that I've got here from scorecards, once I've got to this screen, I might identify something within the call, either by looking at the agent's screen or by listening to the call, that tells me I need to do a coaching session. I don't have to go back to scorecards to do that. At the top of the screen here, I've got a couple of things that I can do. So firstly, let's have a look now to see whether Herschel's already got any coaching sessions. So when I click on this little blue icon, any details for Herschel that are relevant to this might be displayed. So for example, I can see his high-level scorecard, I can see any current coaching activity, and I can see any current lesson assignments. This is important because you don't want to open a new coaching request if it's not needed. So if he's already got 3 coaching requests for the same issue, having a 4th or 5th is probably not going to add much value. But if I decide that I need to coach Herschel, then I can just simply come up here and click onto the coaching button. Now, just like the KPI button that we saw earlier, this will open a coaching request window. Now, this coaching request window is exactly the same as the one we saw earlier, but the main difference here is, because I started from a call, the call is attached to the coaching form. So in future, when we come back to this, we've got all the call details sitting there ready for me to be able to review and to look at. Now, one of the things that we can do with the coaching form is we are also able to add additional attachments. Those attachments can be in the form of files or websites, KPIs or lessons, scores, competencies, interactions or evaluations. Remember, this forms a permanent coaching record that goes into the employee's record, and the supervisor will be able to access going forward. Now that we've talked about the coaching tool, what I want to focus on now is about one of the specific challenges that people have with performance management and coaching. And to help trying to think about that, I'd like you to consider a question. And that question is, how easy you find it today to identify exactly how much coaching activity is taking place within your business and when it's taking place. So to try and identify that, what we can do is we can fill in our details here of how we would like to schedule the sessions. We put in our date, time that we want, our due date, and our ideal location. And then we click on Save to create the request. When we do that, the request will fall through automatically to the scheduling team. And the scheduling team, forecasting and scheduling team, your workforce management team, will automatically be notified of any coaching requests that they will have. And those coaching requests will appear in their calendar screen in a little tool called Coaching and Learning Assignments. So any requests that you create, always created automatically, will appear in this list. They can set these up, they can approve them or reject them. If they don't do anything with them, then when they run the coaching request or the forecasting request, you get a choice of whether you include or exclude coaching activities. Once they're scheduled, the coaching request will appear in the calendar and in the schedule, and they will have a unique color showing in the calendar screen, so you'll be able to see that quite quickly. From the point that it's scheduled, you can also report on that activity to identify exactly how much coaching is requested and at what stage that coaching is in. Now, to finish off the session, we can think about using the calendar and the adherence screen to be able to determine exactly how much coaching is taking place. That makes it really, really easy to visualize how much and when it's happening. But the second question is, when we start to think about, now we can visualize it, the second question that we have is, now that we've got control of our coaching, how can we tell if it's worked? And this can be a really big challenge, particularly if you're investing time and resources into coaching and enhancing performance of your staff. You need to be able to demonstrate that that time is having some form of benefit. Well, with version 15, it makes those conversations quite easy to do. When we are viewing our data within the application, as well as seeing the goal, score, and trend lines that we saw earlier, we also have the ability to turn on coaching and learning markers. These appear in the scorecard as a C or a little computer screen icon that you can see on screen here, which means you can very quickly visualize, particularly when looking at trends, whether there has been any change, positive or negative, directly following any coaching session that you've performed. And not only can you see and visualize that, but these provide a drill down to allow you to go down to that coaching activity to verify it's had an impact or not. On that note, that brings us to the end of that presentation or overview on performance management and coaching. It's a taste of the types of things that you can do with version 15. Hopefully you managed to find that, or you found that interesting, and I hope to see you next time on one of the next 2 webinars that we're running. We've got analytics driven quality on the 6th of December and going beyond pause and resume on the 17th of December. It'd be really good to see you on the next webinar. So on that note, if there are any questions, you can send them across now. If not, I'm happy to address any questions by email, and my email is on the screen for you now if you'd like to have a look at that. Okay. Okay, on that note, it doesn't look like I've got any questions, so thank you all very much for your time, and I think on that note we will end the session.